The courthouse moved on autopilot that Tuesday until Deputy Nolan Rourke decided a black man in a dress uniform didn't belong in the front row. He'd done this before, shifting people around to soothe his ego. But Commander Aaron Stokes wasn't his usual mark. A Navy SEAL with 3 tours, 2 Bronze Stars, and clearance vetted by Congress, he sat still while Rourke yanked his sleeve and hissed, "Know your place!" Stokes didn't shove back. He pressed a finger to a tiny device hidden under his collar. In under 90 seconds, a secure beacon would ping SOCOM, and Nolan's carefully protected world would start fracturing. The morning had been unremarkable for Rourke. 16 years on the job had taught the rhythm of courthouse security: arrive early, check with the bailiffs, pick a vantage point, scan faces, and decide who fit. He loved the uniform, the badge as portable supremacy, and confused demanded deference with earned respect. Stokes arrived 30 minutes early for testimony in a federal procurement matter, dull, necessary, the consequence of his clearance and liaison role. Dress blues, by the book, every ribbon aligned, creases sharp, posture honed by 23 years that stretched from Coronado to Hillmond to D.C. Nolan noticed immediately, not the ribbons, but a black man too comfortable up front. The way Stokes held himself, back straight, hands folded, eyes forward, poked Nolan's need to dominate. This wasn't capitulation, it was composure. That composure read like defiance to Nolan, who policed rooms to assure his own primacy. Federal court drew suits who understood stakes. The gallery hummed with attorneys, witnesses, observers. Nolan operated on reflex, not understanding. He saw patterns, not people, threats to authority, not citizens. Stokes's phone buzzed. Wife Tara's quick text. "Home for Maya's practice?" He smiled, just enough to soften the angles of service. The fleeting warmth somehow hardened Nolan's jaw. Confident, black men in uniform triggered an unexamined fury he'd never questioned or restrained. Nolan strode to the front row with the unbothered swagger of someone rarely challenged by anyone powerful. Shirt crisp, badge bright, radio hissing comfortable static. He'd removed plenty of people, usually black, without bystanders remembering names later. "Sir, move to the back," he declared, voice lacquered with borrowed authority. The room was half empty, plenty of seats. Heads lifted, sensing that familiar oxygen-thin moment before a public humiliation. Stokes turned, gaze cool and professional. Those eyes had scanned kill houses and dusty valleys, weighed threats while calling shots that saved teammates. Nolan saw only refusal. Stokes's voice was measured. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock hearing. I'm scheduled to testify this morning." Nolan flushed. To him, explanations were disguised challenges. He'd learned that logic was surrender, and authority meant never justifying orders. "I don't care what you think you're here for," he said. "That section's for counsel. Move." Stokes didn't shift. Hands still, posture unchanged, empathy switched off. He'd cataloged bullies before, spotting the petty tyranny that hides inside uniforms. This wasn't procedure. It was a performance. One man in authority humiliating another. "Officer," Stokes said, reading the plate, "I'm Commander Aaron Stokes, U.S. Navy, testifying in 20-24 CV 4458. ID's in my jacket if you need it." Rank should have stopped Nolan cold, but control beat protocol in his head. Federal versus local, oath versus swagger. None of that pierced Nolan's certainty. "I don't care what you call yourself," he snapped, hand drifting toward the radio. "When I say move, you move. That's how this works." The gallery went hushed, screens dimmed, papers paused. The mismatch was obvious. Force against calm. Stokes saw the collision clearly. Nolan's power came from a badge and baton. His from oath, competence, responsibility to safeguard, not dominate. "Deputy Rourke," Stokes said evenly, nameplate confirmed. "I respect your working, but I'm not disrupting anything, just waiting to testify." Hearing his name sliced Nolan's cultivated distance. Names mean relationship. He preferred the anonymity of title. "Don't use my name," Nolan hissed, leaning in. "You don't know me. Get up and move before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." Stokes's thumb found the collar device, emergency transmitters issued above certain clearance thresholds. Rarely used, they sent identity, location, and status through encrypted channels in seconds. Nolan clamped Stokes's sleeve, wrinkling pressed wool. Pressure applied, Stokes depressed the beacon. The signal sped outward, carrying credentials and highest priority escalation. "Up!" Nolan ordered, dragging with excess force. Stokes rose smoothly, balance intact, training keeping dignity amid handling. His eyes cooled, the quiet certainty of actions already set in motion, replacing patient assessment. Consequences had begun ticking. "Learn your place," Nolan barked, voice bouncing against paneled walls. Phones appeared like prairie grass in wind, everyone recording what looked like standard misconduct. Unaware they were capturing something with national security implications. Stokes stood, hands relaxed, face unreadable. He'd triggered protocols that bring federal weight in minutes. Military police, federal agents, Pentagon security, alerts were already propagating. Nolan kept performing dominance, oblivious to a higher jurisdiction, closing around him with practiced coordination. "Sir, I'm a United States Navy commander," Stokes said once more, voice carrying. "Please reconsider." Nolan's grip hardened. He steered him toward the back. The beacon streamed biometrics, location, assault indicators, data climbing priority ladders. In Tampa, monitors blinked. Commander Aaron Stokes. Clearance, TSSCI. Beacon active. Location, federal courthouse. Threat, unknown. The duty officer recognized the name and routed the alert to Captain Marcus Baylor, Military Police Watch Commander. Baylor skimmed Stokes's dossier in half a minute. SEAL operator, 3 combat deployments, Bronze Star with V, Purple Heart, now Pentagon Special Operations Liaison. An officer carrying secrets no adversary should touch, and who wouldn't beacon frivolously. "I spin up a tactical team," Baylor ordered. "Loop in the local FBI. Asset compromised in a federal building meant minutes mattered." Back in court, Nolan pushed, convinced he'd just reasserted order. Stokes counted response times silently. "Deputy," Stokes said, while Nolan guided him past startled onlookers, "you're assaulting a federal military officer. Stop now." Nolan shoved harder, fingers biting a shoulder seam. The beacon flagged escalating force. Phones rang in E-rings. Lawyers looked up, instincts sharpening. A federal prosecutor began recording herself, trained eyes spotting conduct that screens carry well. Stokes's calm suggested complexity beyond routine abuse. Nolan finally released him near the back, flushed with victory. He'd maintained control. He didn't realize MP vehicles were already inbound, agents paging in from unmarked sedans, and his name was sliding into databases as an emergent risk to national security. "Stay where you belong," he crowed. Stokes smoothed ribbons Nolan had disturbed. His expression remained composed, but a new clarity rested in his gaze, the certainty of overwhelming help coming fast. "Deputy Rourke," he said softly, "remember this moment. You'll learn jurisdiction soon." Nolan laughed. He'd weathered complaints before. The city machine blunted consequences. Memory faded. But Stokes wasn't ordinary. His beacon surged through 3 time zones. Satellites pinned location. Analysts parsed vitals and posture in real time. Sirens whispered at first. Stokes heard the cadence, deactivated the beacon once assets converged. Nolan heard them and shrugged. Downtown life is loud. He turned to resume patrol just as the first MP truck slid curbside. 2 more followed. Unmarked sedans disgorged federal suits. Radios popped as agencies knitted a perimeter for a compromised federal asset. Stokes stood where Nolan parked him. A text buzzed. "Asset safe. Team deploying. Await federal intervention." Nolan finally clocked the surge outside, swagger wobbling. Tactical kit. Clipped commands, overlapping jurisdictions. This wasn't routine. "Control," he keyed, voice unsteady. "Large federal presence at courthouse. Any operations I should know about?" Dispatch. Unit 49, FBI requests immediate contact. Report to main entrance. Agent Kara Nelson. Nolan's blood chilled. Federals asking for him meant the storyline wouldn't be his. He glanced back. Stokes met his eyes, calm as granite. The doors opened. Agent Nelson entered with 4 agents, presence settling the room like a gavel. She swept the gallery, Stokes, then Nolan, reading posture and dusting off 1,000 similar scenes. "Deputy Rourke," she said, "with me." Nolan shuffled forward, replaying his moves, searching for an angle. Behind Nelson, agents fanned out, photographing seats, logging witnesses, preserving chain of custody. Stokes watched, a man who'd predicted the beat by beat. The break point had arrived. Nelson didn't waste breath. 25 FBI years taught triage. She could read Nolan in a glance. The swagger evaporated once federal weight arrived. "Deputy Rourke," she said, voice steady, "tell me exactly what happened with Commander Stokes." "I was maintaining order," Nolan began, confidence leaking. "He sat in a reserved section. When I asked him to move, he got argumentative." Nelson's pen moved efficiently. Agents built a record designed to survive courts and sunlight. Stokes stayed where Nolan had placed him, watching the case assemble with exquisite inevitability. The beacon had done its job, summoning disproportionate force to shield a national asset. What Nolan called order, Command termed potential threat. In Tampa, Baylor directed a response melding 2 MP units and 3 federal shops. Operators scanned Stokes's file again. TSSCI carries risk far beyond personal. Compromise could threaten operations, personnel, and strategic posture. "Status?" he asked. "Asset secure," Nelson answered over the encrypted link. "Local officer initiated contact without cause. Multiple witnesses. Courthouse video corroborates. Unprovoked assault." Baylor's reply, "Treat as federal assault on military. I want him in custody within the hour." Nolan heard only Nelson's side, but federal custody cut through. Federal means different rules, different prosecutors, sentencing guidelines indifferent to civic booster plaques or friendly supervisors. "Deputy," Nelson said, "the severity here is high." "Commander Stokes is a SEAL with TSSCI," she continued. "Your actions registered as a national security concern. This isn't local anymore." The gallery transformed into a crime scene. Agents mapped, measured, and quietly gathered names and statements. Detective Theo Bell arrived 20 minutes later. Internal affairs. He'd probed Rourke before, watched complaints vanish, witnesses buckle. A pattern persist when plaintiffs lacked power. This time the target had institutional backing Nolan never imagined. "Agent Nelson," Bell said, respectful of jurisdiction lines. "IA's Bell. We've fielded repeated complaints about Rourke, but discipline never stuck." Nelson looked up, interested. "What kind?" "Excessive force, racial profiling, harassment. Same script, different day. Targets, black citizens, claims resisting, intimidates witnesses. Files get buried." Nolan felt walls tilt. IA files, federal presence, military involvement. His tidy world of minor tyrannies suddenly felt very small and very fragile. "I want my union rep," Nolan said, almost pleading. "You're right," Nelson replied, closing her notebook like a door. "Understand. Federal assault on military personnel carries mandatory minimums. Cooperation beats mythology about invincible union shields. And the cameras, high definition everywhere with clean audio." If he'd hoped to retell the moment, the courthouse angles would disagree in chorus. Stokes spoke, voice trimmed to the bone. "This wasn't random. He saw a black officer and decided. He ignored my ID, dismissed my role, used force to move me." The words hung heavy, racially motivated assault against a federal officer. That label carried enhanced penalties and made defenses sound tinny under bright lights. The radio crackled. "Unit 49, Chief Morton requests immediate meeting. Federal agents have requested your disciplinary history." Morton had been Nolan's buffer for years, but federal processes didn't bend to local gatekeepers and favors. Deputy Rourke, Nelson said, satisfaction she didn't bother hiding. You're under federal arrest for assault on a military officer, deprivation of rights under color of law, and interference with federal proceedings. The cuffs clicked, career collapsing. Federal steel on wrists, federal witnesses around, federal charges preparing to travel on federal dockets. Stokes watched with a veteran's quiet. Knowing justice moves faster when uniforms carry flag weight and agencies lock arms. As Nolan shuffled toward processing, Stokes's phone buzzed. Asset secured, threat neutralized. Report to Pentagon for debrief at 1400. The gallery thinned, evidence boxed, footage mirrored, witness lists tabbed for prosecutors who don't blink. Bell approached Stokes. Commander, we've tried to address Rourke's behavior. Contracts and politics kept him shielded. Maybe this breaks the pattern. Stokes's gaze stayed steady. It isn't one officer. It's a system that kept him operational. Federal civil rights teams don't stop at single actors. They follow patterns, training gaps, supervisory failures, institutional bias. Nolan's arrest would be the preface, not the conclusion. Inside the Pentagon, briefings multiplied like cells. The beacon's activation became a case study, why protocols exist, why clearances matter, why threats can be domestic. Captain Baylor received rolling updates. Nolan in custody, local department under document hold, prosecutors prepping early filings. Command wants a full readout, Baylor's aide reported. How did a local officer feel comfortable manhandling a decorated seal in a federal courthouse? The question wasn't just legal, it was cultural, about drift and distorted esteem. Stokes reached the Pentagon still wearing blues, rumpled by Nolan's grip. The contrast was stark. Stokes's quiet discipline against Nolan's insecure bluster. Service ribbons versus petty rage. Institutional purpose meeting weaponized insecurity. Commander, the briefing officer said, this is bigger than one deputy. We're examining failures that let this unfold. Stokes understood. His testimony now touched civil-military respect, clearance protection, and the dignity owed to service. The investigation wouldn't wrap overnight. It would reach months back, complaints, body cam uptimes, supervisors' emails. But the trajectory was obvious from the moment Nolan's fingers clamped wool. Federal processes were awake and moving. That evening, Nolan sat in federal detention, badge surrendered, sidearm logged as evidence. 90 seconds of racist bravado had detonated a 15-plus-year career. Meanwhile, Stokes went home, hugged family, answered texts, slept like steel. Word of the arrest ran hot through the department. Some saw betrayal of the thin blue line. Others saw overdue accountability. Chief Morton felt control slipping, old strategies looking flimsy under federal glare, and military attention. Captain Baylor reached the courthouse 45 minutes after arrest. Protocol demanded command presence when TSSCI personnel were assaulted. He needed eyes on the scene, a first-hand interview, and a sense of whether threats were patterned. The building wore a new skin. MP trucks ringed the block. FBI managed access. U.S. Marshals reset security. Message clear. When top clearance assets face harm, federal authority flatly outranks local badges and municipal turf. Commander Stokes, Baylor said, approaching the spot Nolan had shoved him. Baylor, military police. Was this isolated or part of something larger? Stokes answered evenly, anger kept under discipline, but audible beneath polished sentences. He saw a black man in uniform and decided I didn't belong, ignored identification, dismissed rank, used force. That's intimidation under color of law. Baylor took notes for a report destined to travel high and fast. Bell watched the federal takeover of a supposedly simple local matter with layered emotions. He'd tried to curb Nolan for years, documented, interviewed, assembled cases, only to watch them evaporate into administrative fog. Captain, Bell said to Baylor, deference clear, I've chased Rourke 7 years. This fits the pattern, racial targeting, only this time he hits someone with the authority and backing to push back. Baylor's attention sharpened instantly. If a local officer targeted service members or veterans, command cared. Any documentation of prior incidents involving military? Baylor asked. Bell opened a bristling file, complaints, statements, reports, ignored until a beacon changed the calculus. 3 veterans, 2 active duty on leave, 1 military spouse, Bell said. All dismissed by internal review. Baylor felt the implications land. Ignored complaints from military personnel meant the military had to step in hard. Nelson returned after processing Nolan's arrest, satisfaction unhidden. Some cases are muddy, this wasn't. Security footage, multi-angle, civilian recordings, the asset's beacon data, an evidentiary triad robust enough to withstand heavy lawyering. Captain, she told Baylor, we need scope. Ross's apparent targeting of service members warrants a broader civil rights probe of the department. Baylor understood at once. Pattern and practice work tiers into culture, policy, supervision. Chief Morton arrived 90 minutes after the cuffs. The old swagger was gone, replaced by careful steps on a floor suddenly made of ice. He'd protected guys like Nolan for years. That era had just contracted. Agent Nelson, he said, wearing politeness like armor. There's been a misunderstanding. Nelson's reply was a hammer. There's no misunderstanding. Deputy Rourke assaulted a Navy SEAL with TSSCI in a federal building. He's facing federal charges. Morton had sparred with federals before, usually with some leverage. Military involvement erased bargaining space. Pentagon resources, congressional eyes, prosecutors with long budgets. Local bosses hold no sway there. I'd like to speak to Rourke, he ventured. He's a federal detainee, Baylor said, tone making the jurisdictional map unmistakable. Any contact runs through federal counsel. Outside, cameras multiplied. A story with legs gathered speed. Reporter Lena Torres set up beneath courthouse steps. This is Lena Torres from the federal courthouse, she began. A local deputy was arrested by federal agents after allegedly assaulting a Navy SEAL testifying here. Sources say an emergency military beacon triggered this rapid intervention. The story radiated through veteran networks, civil rights groups, and military families. It wasn't just misconduct. It was about honoring service, policing accountability, and what happens when federal authority overrides local indulgence. Phones pinged everywhere. Stokes's messages stacked. Teammates, mentors, fellow operators. Whole communities watching, one read. He picked the wrong man today. Stokes kept perspective. How many without clearances had faced Nolan's routine? How many swallowed humiliation alone? Nelson's phone buzzed. D.C. Civil Rights Section. Prosecutors were already reading in, seeing a national security color cast over a familiar civil rights canvas. Full push, the caller said. Maximum charges. No please, that blurs seriousness. Washington's prioritizing, Nelson told Baylor. Assaulting clearance holders can be a security issue, not just brutality. Baylor nodded. The beacon had reclassified the encounter. Domestic hostility can compromise assets as surely as foreign threats. Bell returned with additional IA files, painting something wider and darker. He's targeted soldiers and veterans before, Bell said. Not random. It's hostility toward uniformed service, consistent and personal. The scope expanded while everyone watched. Morton made one last bid to reclaim narrative gravity. Captain Mutt, he tried, we can handle it internally. 15 years of service shouldn't crumble over one misunderstanding. Baylor's answer cut neat and clean. This isn't a misunderstanding. He assaulted a decorated SEAL in federal space, ignored identification and rank, and applied force. That's an attack on military service itself. Exceptions exist. This wasn't one. Federal interest here was mandatory, not optional. By evening, the probe's footprint sprawled. MPs interviewed other service members. Agents audited complaint logs. Civil rights attorneys storyboarded charges. Stokes left at last, uniform still creased by Nolan's hands. Faith in institutions steadied. Nolan spent night one learning federal detention doesn't care about hometown plaques. No nods from guards, no backstairs courtesies. He faced charges that would be assembled with resources he'd never imagined could target him. Stokes's beacon had done more than summon help. It had forced a reckoning about how civilian policing treats military service. Federal jurisdiction outran local politics. Respect for the uniform gained its teeth back, loudly. Dawn brought Nelson to detention at 7 with a stack of history. Prosecutors don't build on a single spark, they assemble a controlled blaze. Rourke's assault completed a pattern they'd been plotting for months. "Mr. Rourke," Nelson said as he shuffled in, shackles clinking, swagger gone, "we're going to review your interactions with service members and veterans. We have 14 documented incidents over 7 years." Nolan felt his stomach fall. 14 meant surveillance long before yesterday. The beacon hadn't launched the investigation, it finished it. Every complaint he'd dismissed as noise had been stitched together into a tapestry of power misused. He croaked, "Lawyer?" "You're right," Nelson agreed, opening file 1. "But hear this. Civil rights deprivations, assault on military, conspiracy to violate constitutional rights, pattern under color of authority. Cooperation is your only plausible path to fewer years. Photos, statements, videos, an architecture of proof. Nolan once counted on isolated victims. He hadn't grasped that Federals connect dots relentlessly. Somewhere across the river, Stokes met with military lawyers on threats to uniformed personnel. "Commander," counsel said, "your beacon has become a model. Civilian misconduct can threaten national security. Rourke's focus on service members is a vulnerability we can't ignore." Stokes asked the central question, how many others? 14 documented involving active duty, veterans, or family, came the reply. Dismissed locally, ignored upchain, now part of a federal pattern case. Stokes sat with the scale. Traffic stops, courthouse moments, community encounters, all weaponized. Morton sifted personnel files under court order, 15 years of complaints, dozens of IA cases closed administratively, hundreds of citizens turned away. The federal lens recast everything from messy politics into potential criminal conspiracy. Bell knocked with more bad news. "Chief, they want every case Rourke touched for a decade. They're scanning for patterns of constitutional violations we failed to correct." Morton went pale. The numbers suggested a reckoning. 10 years meant thousands of decisions, hundreds of force incidents, countless ethical stumbles. "How bad?" Morton asked, already knowing. "Bad enough. They're floating RICO for conspiracy to deprive rights," Bell said. The word rang like thunder. Lena Torres burned midnight oil, piecing settlements, insurance payouts, and city legal fees into broadcast clarity. "Exclusive," she told viewers, over $800,000 tied to Deputy Rourke's conduct in the last decade. The figure accelerated national attention. Veterans groups, civil rights nonprofits, and military advocates took notice. Stokes's case had become emblematic, about respect for service, the limits of local insulation, and federal purpose. At the courthouse, AUSA Sarah Martinez organized a charging tree thick with branches. Federal civil rights, assault on federal military personnel, interference, conspiracy, each with real time attached. "Evidence is overwhelming, Fustillo," she told her team. "He targeted service members and veterans, harassment, force, intimidation, persistently." The narrative wouldn't hinge on one video. It would rest on many, plus data, logs, and an officer's own words recorded with humiliating clarity. The union rep showed up at detention with unwelcome reality. "Nolan, the union can't shield you from federal charges. Contracts don't cover civil rights violations here. Prosecutors aren't bargaining with me." The thin line thinned further. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice scraping. "It means you're alone," the rep said. "They want cooperation on supervisory failures, reduced time in exchange for testimony up the chain." Loyalty faces gravity when years loom. Stokes returned to the courthouse for additional statements, willing to help cement precedent. That threats to service members in civilian spaces trigger swift, coordinated protections. He wanted others Nolan had targeted to be heard too. Your testimony is pivotal, Nelson told him. This will shape how seriously the government treats civilian harassment of military personnel. Stokes agreed with one ask. Find the others who filed and were ignored. They were already calling. The second night, Nolan reviewed footage and paperwork that felt like a tide. Courthouse streams, witness audio, complaint matrices, supervisory notes. The case wasn't just strong. It was layered, redundant paths to the same brutal truth. Federal detention offered a kind of cleansing clarity. No familiar rhythms, no favors, no old debts, just time, bright lights, and the dawning understanding that the system he'd abused had a larger system above it. The reckoning had begun in earnest, and the beacon, small as a thumbnail, had dragged hidden patterns into direct sunlight. Civilian policing's treatment of military service was about to be tested in a very public forum. 72 hours in, the case grew from one charge to a full civil rights examination. Nelson had seen misconduct patterns before. Nolan's bias toward military uniforms felt uniquely corrosive, contesting national commitments in the name of control. Sergeant Marisa Hernandez, a Marine veteran, answered first. 3 years earlier, Nolan stopped her leaving a VA appointment. Military ID on dash, Corps sticker on glass. What should have been routine stretched to 2 hours and cuffs for disorderly. He clocked my ID and switched tone, Hernandez told Nelson. It wasn't just race. He resented the uniform. You think that makes you special, he kept saying. Out here, military means nothing. Notes turned into brickwork. Did you file? Nelson asked. I tried, Hernandez said, frustration steady. They said no evidence, claimed I was disruptive, never mentioned he called me a fake Marine or searched because he saw my ID. Patterns sharpened in ink. Hernandez had video. She'd filmed, a habit from deployments. Nolan's voice came through clear. I don't care what you did overseas. This is my jurisdiction. Military doesn't give you privileges. He scattered deployment photos onto asphalt. When she reached for them, he threatened another charge. Nelson underlined time codes. Prosecutors love clean audio of a defendant simplifying their own motive. Establishing intent requires less imagination when the tape obliges. What happened with your complaint? Nelson asked. Detective Bell took it, Hernandez said. Promised 2 weeks. 6 months later, I got a form letter, unsubstantiated, no follow-up interview. They ignored the video entirely. Nelson wrote carefully. In Tampa, Baylor's briefings stacked higher. Each revealed civilian failures that intersected national security. Clearance holders are targets. Pressure points matter. Domestic harassment compounds vulnerability. The military would not sit out this part. Captain, Nelson said on secure video, we're especially focused on incidents involving clearance holders. Harassment can compromise classified work. That angle made urgency obvious. Adversaries exploit stress, fear, resentment, any crack in a disciplined life. The federal capacity dwarfs local. Within a week, agents identified 37 incidents where Nolan targeted military personnel, veterans, or family. Individually deniable, together unmistakable. A conspiracy narrative wrote itself with timestamps and patterns. Staff Sergeant Jason Willis, Army National Guard, came next. 4 stops over 6 months, each stretched beyond reason. The first time, he wore his uniform, a rank bright in morning sun. Nolan scoffed, asked if he thought soldiers outranked cops. I said I respected all law enforcement, Willis told Nelson. He told me to shut up, said military service didn't impress him. He searched my car for 40 minutes without cause. The notes formed a cadence. Willis described a second stop. Plain clothes, drill bag in the back seat. Nolan found it and smirked. Weekend warrior, he said, drawing out the words. Bet you like pretending. The humiliation had weight, even in recall. The third encounter turned to a sidewalk interview. Hands on the hood while Nolan verified a non-existent warrant. Body cam later showed Nolan muting audio while conferring with a colleague. Federal labs can recover muted bites nowadays. The fourth ended with a failure to signal ticket that Willis paid rather than fight. Nelson flagged the date to cross-reference routing logs. Patterns hide in simple municipal spreadsheets. Who gets pulled? Where? When? How often? Meanwhile, Bell assembled cross-sections, complaints that mentioned military IDs, decals, uniforms, base passes. The stack thickened. Nelson could see the jury map already. Consistent hostility towards service members, reinforced by video and testimony. Baylor prepared a Pentagon readout recommending a broader review of civilian harassment risks for service members. The report cited Nolan's pattern as a microcosm of a larger cultural drift, resenting uniforms instead of respecting service. Morton stared at subpoenas requesting supervisor emails, training curricula, use of force audits, and complaint disposition reasons. The old cover of administrative closure looked in federal light like conspiracy to enable constitutional violations. Lena aired a follow-up. Our records review shows a decade of payouts linked to Deputy Rourke. Why did he stay on patrol? City lines lit up. The story moved from scandal to governance failure. Nelson outlined charges on a whiteboard. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, deprivation of rights. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 13891-111, assault on certain officers. Interference with proceedings, conspiracy. Each count stacked differently. Together they formed a steep climb. In the interview room, Nolan tried on outrage and found it didn't fit anymore. This is political, he muttered. Nelson didn't rise. This is documented, she said, sliding photos across a table that had seen worse. She placed Hernandez's video still beside courthouse footage. That's your voice, she noted. That's your hand on a federal officer's sleeve. Silence stretched until it snapped. Talk to your lawyer about cooperation, she advised. Across town, Stokes met with a military council team, mapping policy recommendations, ensure beacon availability, standardize liaison protocols with courthouse security, and run briefings for local departments about military insignia and clearance sensitivities. This goes beyond one building, Stokes said. Service members move in civilian spaces every day. Clarity keeps everyone safer. Council nodded, already drafting talking points for interagency meetings and congressional staff briefings. Back at detention, Nolan was told he'd be transported for arraignment. He stared at a scuffed wall and saw the end of benefits, the end of deference, the arrival of federal rules he never learned. Nelson's team built timelines, incident to incident, complaint to closure, body cam to blotter entry. The dense weave left little room for myth-making. Juries appreciate clean chronologies. Judges appreciate airtight chains of custody. Bell provided training rosters. People who approved Nolan's field time now faced questions under oath. Who signed off on this? What did you review? Where did the videos go? Supervisory negligence wore a sharper label. Enabling. Prosecutor Martinez rehearsed an opening in her head. She would talk about dignity, of uniforms, of citizens, and about lines crossed in seconds that take years to repair. Then she'd play the tapes and let the room hear. Baylor's slide deck took shape. Risk pathways when civilian officers target service members, foreign exploitation concerns, federal response protocols. A small device under a collar had redirected policy at speeds bureaucracy rarely sees. Nelson asked analysts to overlay stops near bases, VA clinics, and guard armories with Nolan's patrol routes. Patterns glowed like constellations. Each bright dot represented a person who deserved better than a lecture about who mattered. Morton's attorneys warned that cooperation might be the only shield left. Negotiating consent decrees beats wearing handcuffs to court. He stared at a framed commendation and felt its weight turn from pride to irony. Community groups called for hearings. Veterans posted support. Civil rights advocates planned attendance. The story had moved from a courthouse scuffle to a conversation about the value of service and the shape of accountability. Nolan's arraignment came with a pale suit and a plea of not guilty. The judge remanded. The prosecutor cited risk of intimidation. Nelson's notes recorded the moment without flourish. The process doesn't need adjectives to be heavy. Outside, Lena's camera caught a small cluster of veterans in quiet formation. No chanting, no theatrics, just presence. the kind that doesn't need a microphone to be heard from a long way off. Bell testified to internal processes, how complaints traveled, how they didn't. He sounded tired, honest, and specific. Specificity is the currency of credibility. Grand statements wilt, details endure, and do their slow, grinding work. Hernandez sat for a recorded deposition, walked through every minute of her stop, every word Nolan used, every movement of her own hands. Truth placed carefully makes a shape juries can hold in both palms. Martinez filed a motion to preserve all courthouse surveillance for the month before and after the assault. Defense objected. Judge granted. Nolan's world keeps shrinking when neutral lenses keep watching. Neutral isn't on his side. Stokes returned to work, fielded check-ins, and ran his miles. Discipline doesn't vanish when headlines bloom. He texted Maya about practice, promised he'd be there, and believed he would be. That mattered more than anything. Nelson checked a board full of names, service members contacted, interviews scheduled, statements transcribed. Progress looks like pen strokes that turn into pages, that turn into consequences, that finally feel like proportion instead of ritual. Baylor briefed senior leadership. The slide that landed hardest was simple. Respect isn't sentimental, it's protective. It listed how federal mechanisms activate to defend the people sworn to defend everyone else. That symmetry felt right. Nolan stared at a visitation window and saw no friendly faces. Union whispers turned into quiet advice. Cooperate or drown. He weighed loyalty against a number that sounded like the rest of his useful life. Nelson prepped a grand jury. Tight narrative arcs, minimal flourish, relentless clarity. She would offer exhibits that spoke in ones and zeros, pixels, and timestamps. She trusted citizens to hear what's said when no one is shouting. Stokes read the draft policy memo. It asked local departments to brief personnel on military insignia and to route disputes up, not sideways. A few pages of common sense can unwind years of avoidable harm. Lena's latest package traced settlement dollars to training line items asking why red flags never corrected courses. The piece wasn't breathless, it was patient. Patient journalism can move things breathless pieces only stir. Martinez rehearsed the language for charging enhancements tied to bias against military service. She would argue it clearly, hostility not merely to a person, but to an institution we ask to do too much and pay too little. Nelson revisited the first 90 seconds. How a hand on a sleeve became national security concern. People imagine threats lurk overseas. Sometimes they sit 2 rows back and need a reminder about whose authority protects whom. Baylor signed off on the final recommendations: strengthen liaison points, educate courthouse security, normalize beacon tech where justified, and keep the response rapid enough that small humiliations don't grow into irreparable fractures. Bell closed a file and, for once, believed it might stay closed for the right reasons. Systems change rarely with speeches. They change when paperwork points in the right direction and people finally read it. Morton drafted a public statement acknowledging failures and promising cooperation. He knew it would land thin. Accountability starts later, under oath with exhibits and memory refreshed by playback and the occasional uncomfortable silence. Stokes ran late to practice, still arrived before warm-ups. Maya waved, ponytail swinging. The world contains both hearings and goals. Both require attention and follow-through. He tucked his phone away and watched her run. Nolan tried to sleep and dreamed of doors closing with the same percussive finality as handcuffs. He woke to fluorescent hum, a tray sliding in, and the knowledge that mornings now start on someone else's schedule. Nelson's inbox filled with confirmations, depositions set, experts retained, forensics clean, no miracles necessary, just the unshowy labor of institutions, remembering what they're for and doing it without trying to look heroic doing it. Baylor walked the perimeter of a different courthouse and imagined it as a map. Ingress, egress, shared spaces where authority overlaps. He thought about how friction drops when clarity increases, then wrote one more line in the memo. The case file thickened, but the story stayed simple. A deputy mistook the badge for an excuse, met a uniform that answered to a higher chain, and learned the difference between local power and federal purpose. Hernandez checked her inbox for a hearing date and felt something old unclench. Justice isn't revenge, it's proportion. A chance to say what happened and be believed without raising your voice. That too is power. Willis called his guard unit commander back. Yeah, he said, I gave the statement. He didn't want headlines. He wanted streets where uniform or decal didn't invite lectures about who rightly wears pride. Nelson drafted a closing that would someday be read aloud. Badges matter, but oaths matter more. Authority defends dignity or it mocks it. Here it mocked and met something larger that doesn't. That's why we're here. Baylor closed his laptop and looked out at a flag tugging its halyard. Respect is discipline in motion, procedures that work without theater. The beacon wasn't drama, it was protocol. Protocol saved time and someone's pride. Lena ended a segment with names of veterans who'd never made news, just statements now in a transcript stack. Spotlight isn't justice, it's a tool. Justice lives in rooms with clocks and stenographers and patient chairs. Stokes texted Tara, home by 7. She sent back a heart and a grocery list. Normal beats heroics most days. He liked it that way. Quiet, competent, nothing to prove to anyone pressing buttons. Nelson organized exhibits A, B, C, then passed Z if needed. She liked order. Order is not control, it is invitation to truth. Control is what Nolan tried. Order is why he couldn't keep it. Bell reviewed a training deck for new recruits. Language sharpened, examples real. If one future deputy hesitates before turning insecurity into force, the paperwork will have earned its weight. One is never just one. Morton rehearsed contrition in front of a mirror. He wished it felt less performative. Authenticity has to show up in actions. Access granted, records produced, disciplines applied, before it shows up in microphones. He knew that. Martinez compared recommended sentencing ranges to cooperation possibilities. Equity isn't softness, it's balance. The balance here would tilt toward years because patterns add gravity. That gravity was earned the bad way, slowly. Baylor signed one last routing slip. The military takes care of its own, quietly if possible, loudly if necessary. Yesterday had been loud. Tomorrow could be quieter because everyone heard today. Systems remember like that. Hernandez cued her video to the moment Nolan scattered photos on asphalt. She paused it there, not for court, but for herself. She exhaled, pressed play, and let time run forward into a different ending. Willis folded his uniform for drill, smoothing sleeves the way Stokes had smoothed ribbons. Little rituals, quiet defiance. He drove without scanning mirrors for the wrong cruiser. That felt like something worth keeping. Nelson glanced at the whiteboard and smiled at how boring it looked. Boxes, arrows, deadlines. Boring is underrated. Boring saves rights and fixes corridors. Boring ends with verdicts that tell the truth without pyrotechnics. Baylor sent the final memo. Educate, coordinate, respect. He added an appendix on beacon deployment thresholds and cross-agency comms. Procedures are just promises written down. Kept promises sound like sirens that arrive quickly. Stokes slid into bleachers beside Tara, who squeezed his hand. The whistle blew. Maya sprinted. He watched with the settled feeling of someone whose institution showed up. Nothing spectacular, just correct. Correct can feel spectacular. In a cell, Nolan stared at a ceiling painted the color of indifferent. He finally grasped the sentence Stokes promised him. The lesson about local authority versus federal jurisdiction is best learned early, not late. The courthouse returned to its hum, but the air felt different, cleaner, like a room after a window opens. A uniform had been honored, a badge had been checked, and a small beacon had done enormous work. Did he search your car each stop? Nelson asked. Every single time, Willis answered. He'd claim marijuana odor or fidgeting, then ransack everything, grilling me about deployments, units, and my clearance level. Mention of clearance questioning alarmed federal investigators. Street cops have zero cause to probe classified access. Work's curiosity signaled either resentful dominance toward military authority or darker motives, prosecutors were now obliged to examine. Detective Theo Bell had logged 7 years tracking Rourke's misconduct through internal affairs files that vanished whenever consequences approached. Now federal agents were combing his dossiers with authority local supervisors chronically lacked and sometimes undermined. Detective Bell, Nelson said inside headquarters, how did policy enable the pattern? Did leadership know he targeted service members? Bell opened binders, thick with statements, videos, and reports. They knew, he said, voice flat. Chief Morton personally reviewed 12 complaints involving military personnel across 5 years, Bell added. Each one dismissed as unsubstantiated. Evidence that warranted discipline or charges was administratively closed without genuine inquiry or corrective action. This one, Bell said, sliding a folder labeled Confidential Internal. A Navy petty officer driving to base, credentials correct. Rourke detained him 3 hours, called him a government freeloader, arrested him for disorderly. Nelson noted the sailor's CO had complained directly to the department about hostility toward service members. The file reached Chief Morton, who personally tossed it as a civilian-military misunderstanding, ignoring documented bias. What was Morton's justification? Nelson asked. He wrote civilian police hold primary traffic jurisdiction regardless of military status, Bell replied. He pretended this wasn't targeted harassment, just a routine stop, despite explicit military-based pretext. The federal probe exposed cover-ups extending past Rourke's abuse. Supervisors reviewed clear evidence of targeting veterans and active duty personnel, yet protected him instead of those he humiliated. Conspiracy charges were now on the table. Corporal Serena Mendez, a Marine reservist, described harassment aimed at families. Rourke stopped her driving kids to school, Marine plate visible, ID and wallet. His tone hardened the instant he saw proof of service. He questioned whether I was a real Marine because I'm a woman, Mendez testified. He ordered my children out, lined them roadside, searched their backpacks, claiming he was looking for weapons or drugs. Child endangerment joined the list. Using police power to terrorize military families implicated civil rights violations and potential federal offenses against children whose only marker was their parents' service. Mendez's voice shook, then steadied. He kept asking my 8-year-old if Mommy brings weapons home after drill, she said, eyes wet. She was terrified. We filed a complaint immediately. Nothing changed. Investigators documented lasting psychological harm to families. The damage to civil-military trust became another prosecutorial thread. Intimidated children learned fear where respect should grow. DOJ attorneys noted ripple effects, eroded cooperation, chilled reporting, and frayed legitimacy in uniformed communities nationwide. Commander Aaron Stokes met other targets inside the federal building, Marines, soldiers, sailors, airmen, veterans, finally able to speak without fear of retaliation. Their only commonality, a cop who should have honored service, not punished it. He pulled me 3 times in 6 months, said Staff Sergeant Jason Willis, an Army veteran with 2 Afghanistan tours. Always a pretext, always a search, always questions about identification, like I forged my life. When Willis complained, the department suggested he was paranoid about racial profiling. The gathered testimonies revealed dual bias, racial and anti-military. Rourke fixated particularly on black service members, as if their rank challenged his control. Petty officer, first class. Malcolm Thomas described harassment outside a VA facility. In uniform, ID visible, he was treated like a dealer. Rourke rifled his medical bag, scrutinized prescriptions, threatened felony charges over legitimate meds. Thomas's account showed interference with veteran health care. Medical privacy is federally protected. Violating it invites serious penalties. Did he say why? Nelson asked. He claimed vets abuse meds to sell, Thomas replied, jaw tight. He called my Purple Heart a sympathy ribbon, Thomas added. Said real warfighters don't need painkillers. The room hushed. Prosecutors underlined calculated cruelty toward wounded veterans. humiliation masquerading as interdiction. It landed like iron. Reporter Lena Torres continued digging, tallying municipal costs, shielding one problematic deputy. Settlements, legal defense, insurance spikes, overtime for needless stops. 15 years totaled north of $1.2 million. Taxpayers funded damage, silence, and repetition. Exclusive, Torres told viewers. Over $1 million to protect Deputy Rourke despite consistent red flags. She found settlement NDAs muzzling service members who'd been targeted, public money used to buy quiet while harm persisted. 12 settlements totaling $340,000 went to active duty, veterans, and spouses, Torres continued. Each included non-disclosure clauses. Victims effectively gagged, while Rourke stayed on patrol with departmental blessing. Screens filled with astonished comments. The financial record added weight to conspiracy. Using public funds to enable unconstitutional behavior meets the statute's teeth. Officials who signed checks while ignoring patterns now risked federal exposure alongside their favored deputy. AUSA Dana Morales built a twin-track strategy: straightforward charges against Rourke, broader conspiracy against command staff who preserved his impunity. Evidence is overwhelming, she told her team. Pattern, knowledge, protection. Each box is checked. Simultaneous filings would blunt local interference. Rourke faced federal assault on a military officer, civil rights deprivations, interference with proceedings. Morton and select supervisors faced conspiracy to deprive rights under color of authority. Rourke's federal public defender finally sat down across from him with unwelcome news. Prosecutors deemed harassment of military personnel a national security matter. Priorities high, resources deep, bargaining space narrow to non-existent. They want a deterrent, counsel said. 20 to 30 years, unless you cooperate against the command structure. The Pentagon's paying attention. So are veterans organizations and defense committees. The politics amplify the prosecution. The choice hardened. Implicate the supervisors who protected him, or gambled decades in federal custody. Upward loyalty, 15 years cultivated, now confronted consequences indifferent to station, friendships, or familiar excuses about split-second judgment. This isn't just you, counsel added. Your case has Washington's oxygen. The military wants clear precedent. Harassing service members draws federal firepower. You're facing the full federal appetite for protecting national assets. That night, alone in the unit, Rourke understood. He hadn't cornered powerless people. He'd assaulted someone backed by protocols designed to move quickly and decisively. Federal priority meant long shadows and few exits. The investigation kept widening. Institutional failures surfaced like wreckage after the tide dropped. Suppressed complaints, disposed videos, euphemistic memos. Each disclosure mapped how one deputy authored harm while many insulated him from consequence. Service members found their voices. Federal investigators brought capacity. Prosecutors brought purpose. Each corroborating witness strengthened cases that translated years of whispers into indictments that would carry real sentences and durable policy change. The story broke nationally on a Tuesday. What began as a courthouse incident morphed into a federal case study. Civil rights, national security, and civic respect braided through military communities and living rooms coast to coast. Not one rogue deputy, Torres reported live. A system shaping harassment of service members, enabled by supervisors, protected by City Hall, paid by you. 12 uniformed witnesses spoke clearly, faces unblurred. Authority replacing isolation. Stokes appeared on camera for the first time since the confrontation. Dress blues immaculate, 23 years earned into posture. He saw a black officer and decided I didn't belong, he said. This is bigger than me. Primetime networks carried the interview nationwide. Families recognized versions of their own experiences. The broadcast reframed police-military friction as targeted hostility and issued a public invitation for additional service member witnesses to step forward. Social feeds ignited. Veterans posted threads under Baha'i respect the uniform and power military matters. Personal accounts stacked, prolonged searches, slurs, retaliatory charges, confiscated IDs, patterns crossed states, agencies, and years, evidence in aggregate, finally impossible to dismiss. Texas trooper called my ribbons participation trophies, one Army vet wrote. 2-hour search because soldiers are druggies who can't hack civilian life. Another, Colorado stop, told service is welfare. Arrested when I asked for command. The scope widened. Civilian harassment of service members wasn't local noise, it was national dissonance. Nelson's team monitored posts, converting credible accounts into interviews, affidavits, and potential exhibits. Public pressure rose. Patience thinned. The feeds validate our findings, Nelson briefed prosecutors. Rourke's pattern sits inside a broader problem. We'll build precedent here. Federal teeth for military protection when local institutions fail or refuse. Heads around the table nodded. Captain Marcus Baylor received daily media digests with command notes. The SEAL community rallied around Stokes, officially and otherwise. We take care of our own, Baylor said at the Pentagon. Harassment draws federal response. Broadcasts ran on base networks and internal channels worldwide. The message landed plainly. Target uniformed service members and expect a swift interagency answer. Local politics will not dilute, delay, or deflect that consequence. Bell's 7-year paper trail turned evidentiary cornerstone, hundreds of pages proving knowledge and suppression. I tried to hold him accountable, he told Torres on camera. Supervisors buried outcomes whenever repercussions got too close. Did Chief Morton personally review your files? Torres asked. 12 cases involving military personnel, Bell replied, holding stamped documents. All dismissed without genuine follow-up. Evidence existed. My reports detailed it. He looked away. That interview hit Morton hardest. Internal affairs isn't window dressing. It's the corrective circuit. When leadership shorts it on purpose, conspiracy stops sounding abstract and starts reading like meeting minutes. Prosecutors underlined names. Rourke's wife, Lydia, had stayed quiet until reporters found threatening messages from furious veterans. He made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve death threats, she said outside their home, voice shaking, neighbors watching. Military families responded directly online with specifics. Your husband called my Purple Heart pity medal, one wrote. He terrorized us so often my son hides from squad cars. The human ledger spilled into public view. Morales used the attention carefully, pressers explaining why DOJ involvement matters when local systems fail uniformed communities. The frame, protection of constitutional rights and national security, not anti-police, but anti-abuse with teeth. Rourke targeted service members because their competence and bearing challenged him, Morales said. This wasn't random. It was systematic hostility toward people sworn to defend the Constitution he violated. The clip became widely shared. Military organizations stepped forward. We support prosecution of civilian officials who enable harassment, said a National Officers Association. The Legion, VFW, and IAVA echoed support, coalition pressure widening space for comprehensive federal remedies. Morton tried damage control and misread the room. Split-second decisions are hard, he insisted. Reporters countered with dates and memos. 15 years of choices isn't a split second, one said. Cameras caught his wince. Chief, your phrase insults combat veterans, Stokes responded later. We understand pressure. This wasn't tactical fog. It was prejudice you protected. Networks looped the contrast, steady military composure versus defensive municipal equivocation. Investigators tracked media leads into new witnesses. Coverage helped find people official channels had missed or discouraged. The pool expanded. So did the timeline across jurisdictions, years, and commanders who signed off without reading. In detention, Rourke watched the tide turn past him. Veterans, families, civil rights groups, unlikely allies, aligned behind prosecution. The symbol no officer wants to become had his name, rank, and department under national lights. Your case is a referendum, counsel told him. Maximum sentences are politically and morally attractive. Cooperation is the only lever left. He finally grasped the distance between precinct confidence and federal gravity. Public exposure reshaped everything. Local misconduct reframed as national concern. Investigators had evidence. Prosecutors had backing. Military communities had voice. The path forward looked less like a trial and more like a reckoning. More victims surfaced daily. Every call widened the record. Gates once guarded by indifference were standing open. The courthouse incident had opened floodgates. The pressure behind them had apparently been building for years. The courthouse bristled the morning trial began. MPs parked nose to nose around the building. Marshals controlled entries. Screening tightened to airline levels. This wouldn't be routine misconduct. It was precedent with uniforms in the gallery. Judge Judith Ellison took the bench with the weight of history visible. 24 years federal, many civil rights cases. Yet this was new. A civilian officer effectively waging hostility against the people guarding the Republic. United States versus Nolan Rourke, she announced. Charges: deprivation of rights, assault on military personnel, conspiracy under color of law, and pattern of misconduct. Statutes with long teeth. Sentences measured in decades, not months. Morales opened methodically. No theatrics, just architecture. Over the next week, you'll hear from 14 service members, she said. You'll see video, hear audio, and read records mapping 15 years of deliberate, escalating hostility. Stokes entered moments later, ribbons catching courtroom light. Jurors tracked his bearing instinctively. Morales continued. This incident wasn't isolated. It was culmination. He targeted service because it contradicted the power he imagined. At counsel table, Rourke looked smaller in civilian clothes. Time in custody had compacted him. Bravado doesn't survive fluorescent truth. His defense, Eric Patterson, aimed not to win facts, but soften inevitable outcomes. He made mistakes, Patterson said. He isn't a monster. The first witness erased that drift. Gunnery Sergeant Marisa Hernandez, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, took the stand, the room adjusting to her quiet, trained precision. Please describe March 15th, Morales asked. Hernandez detailed the stop. Hostility triggered by ID, humiliation of service record, 2-hour roadside detention, plus statements about welfare soldiers who think uniforms grant a pass. Why search? Morales asked. He said military personnel run pill schemes, Hernandez replied. He threw my deployment photos on pavement. Jurors visibly recoiled. Across differences, service earns regard. Rourke's contempt cut through everything. Cross-examination tried misunderstanding. Hernandez didn't flinch. He explicitly said I was searched because I'm military, she answered. He said soldiers are criminals who can't manage civilian life. Bodycam confirmed his words later. Preparation mattered. Witnesses were grounded in details, not adjectives. Police trials often hinge on credibility. Federal teams had rehearsed answers until the truth could walk itself across the room unassisted. Stokes's testimony anchored the case. He mapped the courthouse confrontation precisely. The moment of targeting, dismissal of rank, unlawful force, beacon activation, and the protocols designed to guard clearance holders from domestic threats. Assessment of his conduct? Morales asked. He saw a black officer and decided I didn't belong, Stokes said. He ignored ID and rank, then used force. That's intimidation under color of law. He also explained the beacon signals and rapid interagency choreography, tying Rourke's abuse to national security implications. Clearance isn't prestige, it's risk management. And civilian hostility, Raul magnifies exposure in predictable, dangerous ways. Did you feel unsafe? Morales asked. I felt my dignity attacked by authority meant to protect it, Stokes answered. And I knew it represented a pattern hurting service members across the country. Patterson's cross was mercifully short. Stokes's record and composure made counter-narratives sound invented. Attacking credibility would have insulted the jury's eyes and ears. Patterson let the moment pass and sat down quietly. Willis testified to 6 encounters over 8 months, each longer, harsher. Rourke repeatedly probed deployments and clearance, pressing for classified details. When I refused, he threatened obstruction, Willis said. Jurors stiffened at classified. Did he ask about assignments? Morales pressed. Every time, Willis said, where I'd been, clearance level, whether I accessed anything sensitive. The courtroom understood. Street cops don't collect that information for any legitimate purpose. National security threats entered the case. Whether malice, insecurity, or something darker drove Rourke, the behavior made vulnerabilities, not just indignities. The government didn't need to infer motive to prove serious risk. Bell testified about 7 years of suppressed IA work, 17 complaints involving service members, patterns ignored, investigations kneecapped. Files with names and dates became exhibits, not cautionary tales, buried under fluorescent dust. 17 incidents, Morales asked. Documented, Bell answered, sliding tabs. Supervisors quashed them. The room followed the colored flags. Evidence existed. Leadership saw it, then chose to protect the badge over the oath. Captain Baylor appeared by secure video to explain protection protocols. Clearance holders are national assets, he testified. Civilian harassment creates pressure points adversaries exploit. We must treat those threats seriously, regardless of uniform color. His testimony contextualized velocity. The beacon's ping isn't drama, it's design. It compresses minutes when minutes matter. The jury saw how one deputy's impulses triggered mechanisms built to prevent irreversible harm. For 3 days, witnesses stacked. Sailors, Marines, soldiers, spouses, each story a different facet of the same stone. Audio clips, camera angles, dispatch logs, complaint letters, together, a pattern that explained itself. Thomas revisited the VA incident, pill bottles questioned. Sympathy ribbon. Sneer? Mendez spoke for her children, who'd watched their mother searched like contraband. The gallery learned how humiliation multiplies when little eyes are present. Evidence was multi-sourced and redundant. Defense couldn't disprove. They could only dampen. But water on a wildfire does little when the wind is numbers, repetition, and the accused's own recorded voice. Patterson leaned into years of service, hoping to soften edges, but character witnesses wilted under facts. Dedicated sounded strange alongside footage of flung photos and sneers at ribbons earned in burning places. Morales' closing aimed true. He didn't stumble, he selected. He chose targets, service members. Because their composure contradicted his control, he used authority to injure dignity pledged to defend everyone else's. Screens lit with exhibits. This is about respect for service and protection of rights, Morales said. Local politics protected the abuser. Federal law protects the abused. The last frame froze on Rourke's hand, crushing Stokes' sleeve. The jury deliberated 6 hours. Verdicts landed like gavel blows, guilty on civil rights charges, guilty of assault on military personnel, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of patterned misconduct under color of law. Judge Ellison read with solemn clarity. Each count carried time measured in serious years. The courtroom stayed very still. Rourke finally looked like someone who understood the numbers weren't negotiable anymore. Stokes watched from the gallery, faith in federal process confirmed. Service members weren't rhetorical symbols. They were people with recourse when local systems failed. The verdicts bent policy toward that recognition. 3 weeks, the clerk announced, to sentencing. The next phase would translate principles into decades. In those days, statements were gathered, memos assembled, and a city quietly updated training slides it should have fixed years earlier. The courtroom filled again. Uniforms, families, prosecutors, community leaders. Sentencing isn't spectacle, it's a ledger closing. Federal guidelines treat attacks on service members as grave. Morales sought maximums calibrated for deterrence, not theater. Your Honor, Morales said, these crimes threaten dignity and security. 15 years of deliberate choices, not lapses. Victim statements followed, voices steady, some breaking, all converging on the same wound. Humiliation dressed as policing. Stokes spoke first. Dress blues. 23 years. This wasn't one incident, he said. It was a pattern that belittled service and invited risk. Federal authority exists to stop what local authority ignored. Hernandez followed. Marine ribbon bars, bright. He taught my daughter to fear badges, she said. Children should learn respect, not dread. The room absorbed the generational cost, a debt children pay with trust they shouldn't lose. Willis addressed their security implications. He pressed for clearance details, he said. Threatened obstruction when I declined. That's not curiosity. That's a vulnerability you can measure. The court understood deterrence isn't optional here. Patterson argued mitigation, remorse, years served, stress. But the record showed consistency, not aberration. The guidelines were stiff, the conduct stiffer. Contrition read as calculation, arriving only when exits disappeared. Judge Ellison spoke carefully. You targeted those sworn to defend the Constitution you swore to uphold, she said. The court will sentence accordingly. She tied precedent to protection, so other courts could follow the line. She imposed 50 years total, 25 for civil rights deprivations, 10 for assault on military personnel, 15 for conspiracy consecutive. Federal time moves slow and steady. Parole isn't the valve people imagine. You will not have another chance to misuse a badge, she concluded. Rourke stared forward, finally comprehending that a career's habits had built his own cell, brick by brick, complaint by complaint. Separate proceedings followed. Chief Morton and 3 supervisors were sentenced for enabling the pattern. 15 years for Morton. Administrative discretion isn't a shield when used to orchestrate constitutional harm at bureaucratic scale. Bell received immunity for cooperation. His records lit the road for prosecutors and reforms. IA's purpose, too long frustrated, reasserted itself. Now with federal oversight ensuring documents didn't vanish into desk drawers, federal monitors took hold of departmental policy, use of force, complaint handling, personnel decisions, audited for years to come. The goal wasn't punishment alone. It was a culture that couldn't grow another Rourke unnoticed. Captain Baylor attended sentencing, a visible bridge between uniforms. Federal authority protects service members, he told cameras. Even fellow uniforms must respect that. Let this deter anyone tempted to test the boundary. His statement ran across base channels worldwide. The message ricocheted through units and households. If harassment comes, so will a response. People slept a little easier, others slept less well, appropriately. Torres closed her package from the courthouse steps. This is precedent, she said. Not vengeance, protection. A line redrawn where it should have always been. She traced implications for agencies in cities far from here. Stokes and other victims stood together afterward, quiet, not jubilant. Justice restores. It can't rewind. Still, something practical and precious had been defended. The dignity of service in civilian streets. The investigation's tail extended. Policy rewrites, training overhauls, complaint portals with teeth. Oversight isn't glamorous. It's effective when it's relentless. The department would live under new terms until it proved new behavior. Rourke began federal time at a high-security facility for civil rights offenders. Clinical routines replaced local courtesies. He felt the full distance between hometown reputation and the Republic's larger, colder memory. Service members expressed satisfaction, not spite, at accountability finally matching harm. Justice moved at federal speed, with clarity that didn't need slogans. The deterrent effect could be measured later in fewer stops, fewer scars. The precedent will travel, Morales predicted. Prosecutors nationwide now had a map, how to build, charge, and explain cases where civilian harassment targets military service and, by extension, national security. The blueprint breathed. Veterans groups, military advocates, civil rights organizations praised the outcome. Law schools, academies, and police programs requested files for curricula. Someone's next lecture would begin with a beacon and end with a gavel. 6 months later, Stokes returned for a ceremony honoring investigators, prosecutors, and witnesses. And this is systemic change, he said, not just individual justice. Applause rose, measured, grateful, aware that vigilance was the price. Some uniforms command respect, he added. Federal authority exists to make that respect real. Representatives from every branch, federal officials, and neighbors filled the hall, a coalition built from patience, pain, and perseverance. Stokes went back to work. Faith in process isn't naivete, it's earned. He knew the line could blur again, but fewer people could pretend they didn't see it now. The courthouse, once a scene of humiliation, became an emblem of intervention done right. Not perfect, not fast, but correct. Veterans passed through security and found safer rooms waiting on the other side. Work had picked a fight with service itself, and learned institutions can answer decisively when they remember what they're for. The Constitution proved less abstract than he'd imagined inside fluorescent corridors. Share stories like this, Torres said in a closing segment. Accountability grows where light gathers. Not everyone clapped. Enough did. Comments filled with gratitude and angry promises to do better where they lived. If this resonated, she added, comment, share, subscribe. It helps us reach people who feel unseen. Not performative, practical. Stories with traction move budgets, votes, and policy memos across conference tables. The coalition that formed around Stokes didn't dissolve after headlines cooled. It redirected to policy workshops, town halls, and training rooms where habit becomes culture and culture resists the next bad habit. Families who'd learned to fear patrol cars began relearning trust, not instantly. Trust is stubborn, but stops shortened, questions narrowed. Body cams stayed on, complaints found destinations other than circular files. Incremental, measurable relief. In briefing rooms, slides replaced euphemisms with rules. Recognize insignia. Escalate doubts upward. Treat IDs as proof, not provocation. The badge isn't a mirror, it's a shield for everyone, or it's nothing. Jurisprudence absorbed the case. Citations proliferated. Judges in distant circuits quoted Ellison's language about dignity and deterrence. Monitors pointed to the consent decree like a spine. Systems stand straighter with one. Stokes still wore the same ribbons. They meant what they'd always meant: service, cost, memory. Now, in one more courthouse, they also meant you will be believed if someone tries to grind them underfoot. The community learned to measure safety not by how loudly power speaks, but by how reliably it listens. A small device under a collar had taught a city how to hear. The oath pinned to each badge felt heavier, properly so. Authority, used right, is quiet and exact. Used wrong, it attracts louder authority that doesn't apologize for arriving in numbers. In the end, consequences were personal and institutional. One man lost freedom. Several lost careers. A department lost illusions. Service members got something back they should never have needed lawyers to reclaim. The lesson traveled. Federal justice isn't fast entertainment, it's consistent stewardship. When it treats military dignity as national security, lines brighten for everyone, not only the few who wear the trident. The hall where the ceremony closed emptied slowly, handshakes, quiet thanks, names exchanged for future panels. Reform is built by people who schedule it on calendars and then show up repeatedly. Somewhere, a trainee watched the case video and decided to speak up someday. Somewhere else, another thought twice before flexing insecurity at a uniform. Those are victories with no headlines. If you felt seen by this, Stokes would say, you weren't alone. Institutions need reminding. People do the reminding. Today's reminder had dates, exhibits, and a beacon that blinked until help arrived. Keep telling it, Torres urged. That's how change repeats. Stories don't absolve, they instruct. The next time a deputy squints at a ribbon, a policy and a memory will meet his eyes first. The city's skyline looked the same, but people inside it moved differently, slightly kinder, at the margins, where law meets life. That's where service lives most days, untelevised and utterly necessary. A mother in dress blues walked her kids past a cruiser. The officer nodded first. The girl didn't flinch. That moment won't be docketed. It counts anyway, especially there. Stokes laced up for a run at dawn, breathing even. He didn't run from anything. He ran toward routine. Routine keeps people ready. Another quiet defense. No one applauds enough. Baylor forwarded one last memo. Educate, coordinate, respect. Short words, big work. The best systems feel smaller to those inside them because points of friction have been sanded down thoughtfully. Morales closed the final binder, spine creased from use, not dust. Cases end, precedent starts. She exhaled, then drafted a training invite titled simply, Protecting Service in Civilian Spaces. Bell walked past the IA bulletin board and smiled at a new poster. Evidence is a promise. Keep it. He'd waited years to see something like that in print. Torres compiled a resource page. Hotlines, counsel, reporting guides. Journalism's job isn't gaveling, it's guiding. If a story leaves people nowhere to go, it isn't finished yet. This one led somewhere. In a rec yard, Rourke traced cracks in concrete with his eyes. Choices echo. He'd taught fear. Now he lived with a different version. Structured, supervised, and very, very quiet. The department sent new recruits to observe federal court. They heard oaths recited without swagger. They watched consequences fall without flourish. Some fidgeted, most listened. A few took notes. A recruit asked why the military cares so much. Because it defends you, the instructor answered. Respect isn't ceremonial, it's functional. Protecting dignity protects missions you may never hear about. Night fell on the courthouse steps. A veteran paused where cameras once bristled, hands in pockets, then kept walking, lighter. The building hadn't changed. What happened inside finally had. Somewhere, a dispatcher's script was updated. Escalation pathway when a uniform complains of harassment. The line call a supervisor, got company, notify liaison. One sentence, fewer disasters. Policy is sentences. A civics teacher assigned the case in a senior class. Rights, duties, remedies. Students debated loudly. Then they wrote letters to veterans they knew. Some letters got framed. A police academy instructor rewrote a module. Insignia basics, base access etiquette, medical privacy, where jurisdiction stops. Ask, don't assume. He underlined it twice. Thought of his own father's service. A Marine spouse finally filed a complaint she'd shelved years ago. The portal worked. Someone called back. Accountability can arrive late and still count. It did for her. Ellison's opinion circulated among judges. Her phrase, dignity is a constitutional interest, anchored clerk memos and future rulings. Language deployed precisely becomes the scaffolding others safely climb. In the end, the story belonged to many. Witnesses brave enough to speak, investigators stubborn enough to keep receipts, attorneys disciplined enough to argue without shouting, communities patient enough to endure. It also belonged to a small device hidden in a collar seam, built for emergencies no one anticipates until they arrive. Systems, like people, reveal themselves under pressure. If you read this far, you participated. Attention is civic currency. Spend it where it changes incentives. Today it bought reforms someone else will need tomorrow. That matters. Share the link with someone who thinks nothing shifts. Show them timelines, not slogans. Show them receipts, not rumors. Skepticism is welcome. Cynicism is lazy. The difference is evidence. If you wear a badge, remember, oaths outrank instincts. If you wear a uniform, remember, protection stands behind you. If you're a neighbor, remember, both serve you, not themselves. To everyone who sent footage, filed statements, and showed up, thank you. Cases like this climb on ordinary rungs. Emails answered, meetings scheduled, affidavits notarized. Small tools build big structures. To those still waiting for change, Keep knocking. The better door opens slower, then stays open longer. That's the trade. It's worth the bruised knuckles and the patience. We'll cover the next one, Torres promised her team, closing her laptop. Stories don't end, they braid. Somewhere, another thread is tugging, asking for daylight and a steady hand. Baylor's final note to commands read like a benediction: lead by respect, correct by policy, protect by partnership. Simple sentences travel far when their authors live them. Morales sent thank you emails that didn't sound bureaucratic. Prosecutors are people too, tired, grateful, stubborn. She promised herself to reread Stokes' statement whenever the next case felt uphill. It would. Stokes tucked a program into a drawer beside ribbons and photographs. He wasn't collecting trophies. He was cataloging reminders of duty, of community, of the day institutions remembered themselves. The courthouse lights dimmed. Security walked the halls. The building exhaled. Tomorrow it would inhale again. Motions, hearings, paperwork. Quiet work that keeps the loud work possible. That's how it should be. If this story helped, say so, out loud or online. Encouragement is fuel. So is critique, offered in good faith. Either way, stay engaged. Policy listens to persistence. If you're grieving old harm, we see you. Justice late still counts, healing late still heals. Neither is tidy, both are necessary. Keep reaching. Someone's hand is out. A final reminder, respect isn't a salute, it's conduct. It's the difference between a lawful stop and a performance, between guardianship and theater, between authority and arrogance. Choose well. And if you serve, thank you. The country is bigger than the worst day you've had in uniform. Some days it remembers how to show that. This was one. If you supervise, supervise. Don't excuse, don't bury, don't confuse distance for objectivity. Read the file, watch the clip, own the decision. That's the actual job description. If you legislate, legislate. Fund training, require reporting, insist on liaisons, tie dollars to outcomes, make respect measurable. Budgets are moral documents with numbers attached. Write them accordingly. If you teach, teach this case. Anchor it to rights and responsibilities, not tribes. We can argue tactics honestly when we agree dignity isn't negotiable. Start there. 6 months on, the changes felt less like headlines and more like sidewalks, solid, ordinary, caring people where they needed to go without making them think about falling through. The names will blur for strangers. For those involved, they won't. That's fine. Not every lesson needs a marquee. Some live in policy manuals and steadier hands. If any of this helped you breathe easier, pass it forward. Relief multiplies when shared. So does courage. The next witness might need yours to step into light. We'll keep telling the hard ones, carefully, responsibly, completely. We'll keep checking back after verdicts fade. Justice is maintenance, not miracle. Bring your toolkit. There's always another hinge. Thanks for staying with us this long. Attention is scarce and generous. Use it like a compass, not a spotlight. Aim it at places where people are still waiting. Leave a comment. Share the thread. Subscribe if you want more stories built on receipts, not rumors, on dignity, not drama. It keeps the newsroom stubborn and the cameras honest. Above all, remember, these aren't characters, they're neighbors. The uniforms are real, the choices matter. So do yours. Hold the line, hold each other, and hold institutions to their oaths. If this moved you, help us move it further. Someone feeling invisible might see themselves here. Stories like this don't fix everything. They prove something can be fixed. That's a start. Lesson 1. Dignity needs defenders. In 90 seconds, a hidden beacon proved what many of you already know. Respect isn't granted by a badge, it's earned by conduct. When dignity is shoved, steady courage must answer. Lesson 2. Courage works best in company. A calm seal, firm witnesses, and swift federal partners showed how truth stands taller when neighbors speak up. We learned this after Selma and 9/11 alike. Link arms, then move. Lesson 3. Change is policy, not promises. Beacons, body cams, and real oversight, quiet tools that turn outrage into results. Keep them funded, measured, and public. That's how we protect our grandchildren's courthouse seats up front. Friends, does this story change how you think about respect, authority, and real safety? If you were in that front row, what would you want your community and your federal partners to do in the first 5 minutes? Tell me about times you saw dignity defended or denied, and what actually worked afterward. Policy, training, cameras, or something simpler like one brave witness. I'd love your wisdom. Like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next conversation. We're building a place where experience speaks and change listens.